I'll say what's not allowed to be said by Democrats, by the politically correct, by the DEI mavens, by people on that MSNBC panel, and apparently by any Democrats in the power structure within the party and within campaign small circles of trust. I'll say what none of them seem capable of saying. Kamala Harris is a horrible politician. We are now finally hearing from the Kamala Harris campaign team. They're doing podcasts and they're answering questions. And well, they're trying to explain what exactly happened, not only to the $1.5 billion they had, but with the blue wall and with the strategy and with all the things that were going to make Kamala Harris the first woman president in history. And well, I'll let you hear from first the campaign manager, Jen O'Malley Dillon, as she answers some of these questions too. Was this Pod Save America? I think it was Pod Save America. Let's see if you think she's telling the truth and you agree with her expert analysis, okay?
I would say, I mean, look, I am not media hater by any measure. And I think that, we women don't get far in life talking about double standards. So that's not the point. But I do think a narrative, 107 days, 2 weeks f***ed up because of a hurricane, 2 weeks talking about how she didn't do interviews, which, she was doing plenty, but we were doing in our own way. We had to, be the nominee, had to find a running mate and do a rollout. I mean, there was all these things that you kind of want to factor in, but real people heard in some way that we were not going to have interviews, which was both not true and also so counter to any kind of standard that was put on Trump that I think that was a problem. And then on top of that, we would do an interview. And to Stephanie's point, the questions were small and processy and about like
dumb.
They were not informing a voter who was trying to listen to learn more or to understand. And I'm not here to say that the whole system was focused on us incorrectly. I'm just saying, like, again, of the things we need to explore as we move forward as a campaign and as a country, that does a disservice to voters. And, I think back and think we should have signaled more of our strategy early on about podcasts and who we were trying to reach. But we had a limited amount of time to reach the people we're trying to reach, and we were trying to go to them. But being up against a narrative that we weren't doing anything or we were afraid to have interviews is completely bullshit, and also like took hold a little bit. And we just gave us another thing we had to fight back for that Trump never had to worry about.
Yeah, well, Trump never had to worry about the narrative that he was afraid to do interviews because he did a ton of interviews. She said bullshit, but the fact is everything she just told you was bullshit. I want to break this down for you. We got a lot of clips here. It's worth breaking down because they lie. They constantly lie. And this is, by the way, a left-wing podcast. So they're all trying to affirm to each other that they're the smartest people in the room and everything's fine. But everything you just heard was, in fact, the aforementioned BS. Let's watch it together, shall we?
I mean, look, I am not media hater by any measure. And I think that, we women don't get far in life talking about double standards. So that's not the point. But
all right. So the but there is a key indication that everything she said preceding the but is in fact exactly what she thinks. So I'm not a media hater, but I'm about to tell you that it's the media's fault. And we women, we shouldn't point out double standards. What does that even mean? That's all we hear from women, usually, women of the left, of course. But there was a double standard. So, okay, here we go. It's the media's fault and there's a double standard. Thanks for the preface.
I do think a narrative, 107 days, 2 weeks f***ed up because of a hurricane.
Think about that for a minute. She just said that 2 weeks of the campaign were up because of the hurricane. She's blaming the hurricane. First of all, darling, the people who suffered from the hurricane were not you and your $1.5 billion campaigning candidate. The people suffering from the hurricane are the people who are still suffering from the hurricane. They're living in tents still because of the complete and total disaster that is FEMA and the Biden-Harris administration. Okay, think about this. She's the vice president of the United States. She's in a position of power and influence. A natural disaster occurs. She's trying to sell herself to the American people as the most competent person to be able to run our government. forgive me for saying so, but a hurricane in the middle of that campaign, if you're good, if you know what you're doing, if you're competent, is in fact an opportunity to show the American voter exactly those things. To say that the campaign was effed up because of the hurricane is a clear demonstration that Kamala Harris is incapable of making decisions, taking a leadership role, showing that you know what you're doing and that you're competent and able to do that. Remember how they had the photo op of her sitting at the head of the table with people from FEMA, but she didn't actually take any questions? They had the photo op. It was fine. She had a scripted statement about the hurricane that she put out there. She attempted to demonstrate that she had the reins of power and she was fine. She's in charge here. She's going to handle everything. Let me prove the point for you. In 2012, in the final weeks of that campaign where Barack Obama was running for re-election against Mitt Romney, have you ever heard of Superstorm Sandy? A giant storm off the coast of New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, hammered the East Coast. Barack Obama mobilized FEMA. You may like Barack Obama, you may not like Barack Obama, but that was in the middle of the campaign. And I assure you, Superstorm Sandy did not F up his chances to be reelected. It probably helped cement his chances for reelection because he actually got aid and money and was on the scene. He got a hug from Chris Christie, the governor of New Jersey. He demonstrated leadership. I mean, it was all BS. It was made for TV, but he did it well. Kamala Harris and certainly the people who ran her campaign did not do it well. One other thing about the interviews here.
They were not informing a voter who was trying to listen to learn more or to understand. And I'm not here to say that the whole system was focused on
talking about the questions that the interviews asked. Let me go back a little bit further. I'm sorry I missed.
Were small and processy and about like
dumb.
They were not informing of
dumb questions. When we did interviews, we were asked dumb questions. Okay, love to hear from Dana Bash at CNN, who had the exclusive first interview with Tim Walz as well. How about Stephanie Rule at MSNBC? What about the folks at 60 Minutes? Think about 60 Minutes for a minute, who deceptively edited the 40-minute interview with Kamala Harris and reduced it down to 20 minutes. They faked the answers and questions. We caught them on that, and we've shown you the video many, many times demonstrating that. They still won't release the entire full transcript of that 60 Minutes interview to protect Kamala Harris. And now here's the campaign manager coming out and saying, yeah, all the questions they asked were dumb. There's your reward, CBS News, for ruining your journalistic integrity to get your woman elected. She lost, and now they're throwing you under the bus, saying that you're lousy reporters and lousy journalists because you asked dumb questions. Are you going to release the transcript now, pal? And this is a beautiful thing to watch. Now, when you're doing the post-election analysis, are you going to ask the woman who just engineered the failed election, or are you going to ask a guy who has won 2 presidential elections in his lifetime? Because this guy has a different opinion. James Carville, who are you going to believe? James Carville or the people who just lost?
Vice President was thinking about going on Joe Rogan's show, and a lot of the younger progressive staffers pitched a hissy fit. Supposedly the campaign said that wasn't the term effective, but they did. When you put a campaign together and you hire young people to do work, let me tell you exactly what you tell these people, what I would tell them. Not only am I not interested in your fucking opinion, I'm not even going to call you by your name. You're 23 years old. I don't really give a shit what you think. And let me tell you another huge error this made, is when people said campaigns need to reflect progressive values. No, they don't. No, they don't. Campaigns are authoritarian by their nature. And if I were running a 2028 campaign and I had some little snot-nosed 23-year-old saying, I'm going to resign if you don't do this, not only would I fire that motherfucker on the spot, I would find out who hired them and fire that person on the spot. I'm really not interested in your uninformed, stupid, jackass opinion as to whether you go on Joe Rogan or not.
I mean, that's like him or hate him. That's probably the way a campaign should be run. And you did hear this, the few leaks that you did get sometimes from the Kamala Harris campaign, and neither the Trump nor the Harris campaign leaked much, I have to say. So that's some discipline going on both sides of the equation. But you would often hear that Kamala Harris was torn about the Israel-Palestine issue because so many people on the campaign were so pro-Palestinian, and they really wanted the campaign to take a firmer stance on that. Try that with James Carville in charge of the operation, and you see what happened. But he raised the issue of whether she should go on Joe Rogan or not. And whether Kamala Harris should go on Joe Rogan or not is really not an issue in terms of votes and media exposure. It was really a commentary about who Kamala Harris was, how the campaign was run, and, oh, by the way, the lies that they told about why they didn't go on Joe Rogan. Now, we all know why Kamala Harris didn't go on Joe Rogan, because she could not sit there and talk like a normal human being for 3 hours. We know that. Everybody knows that. But they're still lying about it. Watch this. Stephanie Cutter from the Kamala Harris campaign. This is amazing to watch. And I'll be stopping and starting, just so you know, during this so I can give you my commentary.
Should Kamala Harris have gone on Rogan? Can you just, not to be tedious about it, could you talk a little bit about how close she came to doing it, why it didn't happen?
Yeah, there's a lot of intrigue
Hmm,
around
yes.
this, a lot of theories. It's pretty simple. We wanted to do it. I hate to repeat this over and over, but it was a very short race with a limited number of days. And for
Okay, so let me just jump in there. They keep saying it's a short race, short race. Let me ask you a question. They're acting like it was inevitable that Trump would win. They're acting like nobody could have beaten him. They're acting like this was this, like, impossible task that they took on against their best judgment. But boy, they're going to do the best they can. And boy, they came close. Donald Trump was twice impeached. Donald Trump had been called Hitler and a fascist for 8-10 years. He was called a Russian asset. He had been convicted of over 30 felonies. They threw everything at the book of him. They called him an insurrectionist. They warned people that if he won the presidency, it would end our country as we know it. It would be the last free election we ever had. They had Oprah, they had Beyonce, they had Taylor Swift, they had Megan Thee Stallion, they had Queen Latifah, they had James Taylor, they had John Bon Jovi, they had Bruce Springsteen. Right? They had everybody. They had pop culture. They had late night TV shows. They had Saturday Night Live. They had all of Hollywood. They had all of academia. They had all of the news media. And you're telling me that no one could have beaten Donald Trump. And because we only had 107 days. Well, when Donald Trump decided to go on Joe Rogan, it was within that 107-day window. It's not like you had to play catch up, because he had already done Joe Rogan. He did Joe Rogan in the final 2 weeks. I think it was the 10 days before Election Day. Okay. So you can't tell me that it was this short period of time that really was the problem for you. It's a lie. They're trying to cover their own asses. And I guess they're trying to cover Kamala Harris's ass. They're all asking what went wrong, what went wrong. There's one answer to what went wrong. Kamala Harris is a terrible candidate, a terrible politician. You know how I know? Because this is exactly what happened 4 years ago when she was trying to get the Democrat nomination for president. She disintegrated. She crumbled. She cannot withstand the lights of an interview or a campaign trail. All right, but we'll back to the Joe Rogan thing. Okay, that's the first big lie.
a candidate to leave the battleground to go to Houston, which is a day off the playing field in the battleground.
Couple things here. Joe Rogan is not in Houston. Joe Rogan is in Austin, so you're a moron. Number two, we got to take our candidate off the battleground. Trump did it, and he won. He left battleground states. He did Joe Rogan, and he won. So I guess what you're telling me here is that you made a judgment call. Both campaigns had a decision to make. One of them decided, you know what? Let's go off the battleground states, do Joe Rogan, and take that risk. The other candidate, based on Stephanie Cutter's advice, decided, nope, too big a risk to leave the battleground states and do Joe Rogan, so we're going to stay out campaigning. One of them won, one of them lost. The one who lost made the wrong decision. And nowhere in here will she say that. Listen, we decided it wasn't worth doing, and clearly we were wrong. That's the thing you won't hear her say. Watch.
You know, getting that timing right is really important. So we had discussions with Joe Rogan's team. They were great. They wanted us to come on. We wanted to come on. We tried to get a date to make it work, and ultimately we just weren't able to find a date. We did go to Houston, and she gave a great speech at a.
Again, Joe Rogan's not in Houston. You idiot. Texas is a big place, I know, but it's not Houston. So how much working knowledge does she really have of the Joe Rogan team and the Joe Rogan podcast if she keeps getting that wrong?
An amazing event.
The Beyonce event.
Yes, well, I'm going to call it reproductive freedom. And
oh, I love that part. The Beyonce event. You know, the Beyonce event where Beyonce was billed as a performer and then she never performed. And people left after Beyonce comes out and introduces Kamala Harris and they started booing her. And Stephanie Cutter's like, well, it was really a reproductive freedom event. Let me tell you something. If you were going to do a big event with Kamala Harris in Houston, Texas, at the football stadium where the Texans play, is it Reliant? No, it's not Reliant. I can't remember. Yeah, it is Reliant, I think. And you're billing it. Hey, come out and see Kamala Harris at a reproductive freedom event and fill my football stadium. If you don't announce Beyonce's going to sing, I promise you, you're not going to fill that football stadium. But instead, you say Beyonce's going to sing. And look, everyone's here to see Beyonce.
Because Texas is ground zero for the impact of these Trump abortion bans. There's a story out today, in fact, of another young woman who.
I love that they're still, the Trump abortion bans, they're still on message, even though that message was roundly defeated on election day, but they can't help themselves.
Lost her life because of it. And we were hoping to be able to fit it in around that. And ultimately weren't able to do it. As it turns out, that was the day that Trump was taping his Joe Rogan. So which they had never confirmed to us. We kind of figured that out in the lead up to it. You know, she was ready, willing to go on Joe Rogan. Would it have changed anything? You know, it would have been it would have broken through, not because of the conversation with Joe Rogan, but because the fact that she was doing it. And that was really the benefit of it. Will she do it sometime in the future? Maybe.
Wow. Think about what she just said. The only reason her going on Joe Rogan would have broken through is just the fact that she did it, not because of the actual quality of the content of the conversation. That is an incredible tell right there. In fact, it tells you everything you need to know about the candidate. And frankly, Stephanie Cutter's impression of her own candidate. Yeah, if she would have done it, it probably would have broken through, but not because of anything that she said. And that's why they didn't do it, by the way, because only harm could have come from it. The fact of the matter is something would have come out of that interview, and it would have been about what she said, and it would have been damaging. That's why she was so protected. That's why she was in the bubble. This Stephanie Cutter person, I mean, if you're hiring someone to run the comms and marketing and messaging of your presidential campaign, you might want to look far and wide before you end up hiring her. She went on to talk about their TikTok platform as well.
But we have to pay attention to why people find that appealing. And his use of TikTok and specifically reaching those younger men, I can't tell you how many friends of mine or nieces and nephews would say to me, you know, I'm getting these things from Trump all the time on TikTok. And they're not political people. They weren't signing up for that stuff, but Trump was reaching them. So there is a lot for us to learn in that. But I will also.
Let me just tell you something, because we have a personal connection to this story. We found this video from our friend Greg Price, who actually worked for the Trump campaign on their social media strategy. And he and another person, two people, two guys, two bros. What is Greg, 25 years old, 26 years old, I think? 27. Thank you. He's a great guy. Known him for a few years now. He tells the story. I was one of the two guys who ran the Team Trump TikTok account. Keep in mind that Kamala had a whole team running their TikTok while we had the simplest of simple TikTok operations going at Trump HQ. It was literally just 2 of us. When he took over in August, Team Trump was at about 300,000 followers, while Kamala HQ had 3 million. By the end of the campaign, we lapped them in followers. It's 8.1 million today. Forbes recently wrote a story about 2 campaigns on TikTok where they noted while Harris was reaching a consistent audience more often, Trump was reaching a larger audience overall. TikTok was a powerful tool in the election. I firmly believe it played a major role in the Gen Z shift toward President Trump. Team Kamala was so proud of the TikTok cringe they posted on a daily basis. But at the end of the day, all the brat memes in the world can't manufacture authenticity where there is none. That's the key. Everybody's, from Coke to Budweiser to Jaguar to Ford to presidential candidates. Like, oh, how can I get to those voters and have those customers? I got to be on TikTok. Well, yeah, I guess, but it's really what you're selling. Ultimately, it comes down to the product and how you communicate the benefits of your product to the potential customer. And if your product sucks, it doesn't matter what you do on TikTok with it. It's just going to show that your product sucks. And Greg Price goes on to say, we were lucky enough to be able to promote a winning message for a president made for this moment. I'm certainly very happy that the family members of Kamala's team enjoyed our content. That's Greg Price twisting the knife, and he has every reason to, and to take a victory lap. What a guy, and what a job he did. All right, now David Plouffe. Now, this is the guy who does the nuts and bolts. This is all, by the way, Obama's team, okay? These are and the difference, they're never going to tell you, but the difference is Obama is a very good politician and a very good campaigner and a smart one. Kamala Harris isn't anything of those 3. Not a good politician. Think about it. Other than when she ran as the running mate to Joe Biden, and that campaign and election is a whole other story that really has more to do with the pandemic than anything else. Every other election she's had has been in the state of California or in the city of San Francisco. She has never faced an opposition. In fact, the last time she ran in California, she ran against another Democrat, because that's how they do things in California. They have a jungle primary where it's just the 2 top candidates in the primaries, regardless of party affiliation. She has never faced a formidable opposition Republican, and she certainly never faced a formidable media asking tough questions. This is the first time she's ever done that. David Plouffe now talking about the nuts and bolts.
Cheney, whether you saw any blowback at all in your data.
Well, first of all, like any organization, that's got the resources in the private sector, or in this case in politics, you make as many decisions as you can based on data by the marketplace. Okay. So, turnout was up in Milwaukee, it was down a little bit in Philadelphia and Detroit. But, we'd spent a lot of time with voters who we were concerned weren't going to vote. And the fact that Liz Cheney was supporting Kamala Harris was not an issue raised by any of them. Okay. So I'd say a couple of things. We were in a challenging political environment where, to get to 50% of the vote in enough states to win 270 electoral votes, we needed some percentage of Republicans. But I think what people forget is it's more the independents who act like Republicans, where issues of democracy, of how unhinged he is, Project 2025 mattered to them, even to some conservative Democrats. Also, when you're being attacked as being a crazy, out of touch California liberal, when you have generals and former Republican elected officials saying, I'm for Kamala Harris, that helps rebut that. In many respects, that'll be more effective than what she would say herself. And then as it relates to the comments about, wanting generals like Hitler, that bothered voters. Okay. This is something that concerned them about, okay, he seems like he's lost a step. He seems a little more unhinged, unstable. The people who worked for him last time are warning us. And now he says something like this. So, yeah.
All right, I want to jump in here. There's more to this, and it's really informative. This is David Plouffe. He's the data guy. He's the polling guy. He's the messaging guy to help the messaging based on the polls, right? And he told you a couple of things there. None of the voters were bothered by Liz Cheney campaigning with Kamala Harris. They were very worried about Project 2025, and they were very concerned about Trump saying that he wanted Hitler's generals. He's talking about the voters they already had. They're talking about their base voters. They're talking about the people who are already in line to vote for them, the ones with TDS. Not the voters they needed to compel at the end of the day, the ones that either undecided or were inclined to vote for Trump, but you had to give them a reason to vote for you. And that each one of those things, think about it. Liz Cheney, Project 2025, Trump, Watts, Hitler's generals. None of those tell the voters why you should vote for Kamala Harris because of who she is and what she'll do. It only tells you why you shouldn't vote for Donald Trump. And I cannot repeat this enough. And it's free political advice, guys. If you want to watch, but if you want to beat Donald Trump or after him, whatever MAGA Republican is going to run, by saying Trump is Hitler, you're not going to succeed. You're not going to win. You've been doing it for 10 years. We don't believe you anymore. We have our own experience with our own eyes. I know it makes Joy Reid happy. I know it makes the viewers on MSNBC happy, and I guess the people that David Plouffe cares about. But the people David Plouffe cares about are not the people who are going to win you an election. But they couldn't help themselves. They spent so much time on that narrative that they had nothing left. And they couldn't just go up there and say, here's how great Kamala Harris and her ideas are, because she wasn't, and they weren't. But they're still in denial. They cannot bring themselves to it. If you listen to what David Plouffe says here, and he's basically saying, no, we were right. We were right. The Titanic was a great ship. Nothing could hurt it.
Yeah, we could have decided to ignore that and just say, let's talk about tax cuts today. I don't think that would have advanced the ball with the people we needed to advance it with. And again, I just want to, again, it can sound like making excuses. This political environment sucked, okay? We were dealing with ferocious headwinds. And I think people's instinct was to give the Republicans and even Donald Trump another chance. So we had a complicated puzzle to put together here in terms of the voters. And it was going to take a little bit more independent Republicans than we saw in 20, maybe 1% more Republican voters for us. It was going to take voters saying, even though I judged Trump's first term favorably, I'm more concerned about him this time. We had to get more voters to say that. So, you know, and if you look at how we closed, I think we did one day with Liz Cheney in the last couple of weeks. You look at the ads we ran, they were heavily centered on the economy, on tax cuts, on Trump being for the wealthy. So this notion that somehow we weren't focused on the economy, that was the driving motivation and message in our campaign. The closing speech, yes, it took place at the Ellipse, was a huge contrast on the economy and the people Donald Trump would fight for and the people Kamala Harris would fight for. So I think that mistakes, I think my concern about that is just, again, we have to understand that what happened in this election and what didn't. And, I think at the end of the day, we had to raise people's concern and the threat level of a Trump second term. I think if you look at our internal data, and Quentin can speak to this, we did a lot of that. We just didn't get it to the extent that we needed to win. But at the end of the day, I think people, it was the price of eggs that drove a lot of the debate here. And I think Trump's going to be in hot water because he's going to do a lot of stuff starting January 20th. That's not going to be about the price of eggs. It's going to be about sort of the MAGA ideological pursuits that he and his base will insist happen, whether that.
Actually, he's going to be doing something on day one that will bring down the cost of eggs literally overnight, and that is to release the oil and gas industry in America to go back to the free drilling and free exploration of energy domestically. Energy costs are based on futures markets, so that will immediately bring down the cost of oil and gas on futures markets. And by bringing those costs down, that immediately affects the process of bringing eggs to market and everything that goes into it. Don't believe these people. They've been wrong about everything. And by the way, think about it. He just said, well, we closed with a big, strong message on the economy. Yeah, but the problem is there was no reason for American voters to trust you on the economy because she was tied directly to the Biden economy. We had really strong headwinds and people wanted to give Republicans another chance. Why? Because we had just been through 3.5 years of hell thanks to the horrible leadership of Biden-Harris. And when given the opportunity to say what she would do differently than Joe Biden, she said nothing comes to mind. But None of these people will say what's obvious, that Kamala Harris was awful. One other thing here, if I can turn it back to the media, because there's something else in this David Plouffe exchange on this podcast that tells you something about how people consume media. You'll remember that leading up to the election, if you got your news from broadcast networks, CNN, MSNBC, Washington Post, New York Times, basically anywhere other than an independent streaming place like this, you probably heard that it was neck and neck. You probably heard that it could go either way. You probably heard in the final week or so of the election that Kamala Harris was pulling ahead and things were looking good in the polls. Now, if you watched this show, every other day we broke down the polls, sometimes state by state in the battleground states. And we told you how Trump was sitting in a place better than he's ever sat before, and that if everything stays the way it's looking right now with the polls, Trump is going to win every single one of those battleground states. That's what we were telling you. We were telling you exactly what happened. So how is it so different? Why did the New York Times have different data for their readers? Why did MSNBC communicate something different to their viewers than what we showed you to our viewers? David Plouffe reveals it right here. This is not getting a lot of attention. Pay close attention to it, please.
When we got in, my recollection is some of that snapped back, but we were behind. I mean, I think it surprised people because there was these public polls that came out in late September, early October, showing us with leads that we never saw. I mean, it was just basically a race that in the battlegrounds was 46-47, 47-48. So that's not where we started. We started behind. She was able to climb out. I think even after the debate, we might have gained 0.51. It wasn't a race that moved a lot. And so I think when you think about our own internal analytics, if you have Wisconsin at 47-47, or Pennsylvania 48-47 Trump, let's say, which I think is where we had it at the end, you've got to have undecided break your way more than your opponents. And you've got to get a little benefit from turnout, which we weren't able to do.
Did you hear the beginning of that, though, where he said we were seeing public polls that showed us in the lead? We never saw that internally. His internal polls, the real polls, not the consumer public polls that the New York Times puts out there, never showed them ahead during the entire race. And the New York Times at the very end decided to exclude certain polls from their polling average because they thought they were too Trumpy. They were the truth. They were accurate. But the New York Times didn't believe them. So the New York Times didn't share those numbers with their audience. And of course, MSNBC and the networks and other newspapers, they follow the lead of the New York Times. What did we do here? We showed you the raw data from Real Clear Politics. We didn't make an editorial judgment. If there was a poll that looked bad, we would tell you, oh, this poll looks bad. See, this is a lot about this campaign, but it's also very much about the media and how the media communicates to their audience. You wonder why the ratings are low on MSNBC right now. Part of it is because their viewers are in a bad mood. They don't want to hear more about Trump being the president. But part of it is because they refuse to watch now because they feel betrayed. They feel like they were lied to. MSNBC has lost the trust of their viewership. That's why our numbers are up, by the way, because we told you the truth. And we're in a damn good mood. One other bit of political analysis while I'm on the MSNBC train. I went back and spent some time this week looking at some of my favorite clips from election night. And by far, this is my favorite one. And it sort of buttons up all this happy talk about, gosh, we don't know what went wrong with this election. We had all the right numbers. We had the great strategy. Everything we did was right. I guess Trump was just inevitable. I don't know what it was. Well, I want to remind you what Joy Reid, that brilliant political analyst, told the viewers of MSNBC on election night as it looked like Trump was about to win the election.
And I think it's important to say that, anyone who has experienced or been in the United States for any period of time and experienced this country's history and knows it cannot have believed that it would be easy to elect a woman president, let alone a woman of color. Mm-hmm. Let's just be clear. Mm-hmm. And nothing that was true yesterday about how flawlessly this campaign was run is not true now. I mean, this really was an historic, flawlessly run campaign. Queen Latifah never endorses anyone. She came out and endorsed. She had every prominent celebrity voice. She had the Taylor Swift, she had the Swifties, she had the Beehive. Like, you could not have run a better campaign in that short period of time.
Okay, so a couple of things here. First of all, Joy Reid is out there saying that she ran a flawless campaign. And let's face it, it was hard enough for America to elect a woman, let alone a woman of color. So here's Joy Reid already planting the seed that the reason that she lost is because she's a woman and because she's black, or half black, half Indian, right? Half Asian. And no one's allowed to disagree with that. Okay. This frankly is an example of Kamala Harris being a DEI candidate. Okay. Where she's great. And if you criticize her abilities, if you criticize her talent, if you criticize her intelligence on the campaign trail and her ability to run a campaign, you're racist and sexist. No. She was perfect. If she lost, it's because the voters are racist and sexist, right? But then to give you an example of how flawless the campaign was, all Joy Reid can come up with was she got endorsed by Queen Latifah, by Taylor Swift and had the backing of the Swifties, and by Beyonce and the Beehive. She had every celebrity endorsement. So the example Joy Reid, the evidence that Joy Reid brings to the table about how flawless the campaign was that she got celebrities to endorse her. Clearly, it was a flawless campaign. She had a Taylor Swift endorsement. And I think my favorite part of this entire clip was this moment right here. Rachel knows. Rachel's not dumb. Rachel's smart. Rachel has to sit on that panel and tolerate this. She gets paid very well to just listen and keep her mouth shut, but Rachel knows. Rachel knows better than anyone at that table. Rachel knows about Kamala Harris. Rachel knows about the voters. Rachel knows about the campaign. Rachel knows about the issues. And most importantly, Rachel knows about Joy Reid. I'll say what's not allowed to be said by Democrats, by the politically correct, by the DEI mavens, by people on that MSNBC panel, and apparently by any Democrats in the power structure within the party and within campaign small circles of trust. I'll say what none of them seem capable of saying. Kamala Harris is a horrible politician. And the fact that she's exceeded and reached the levels that she's reached at this point in her career has very little to do with her talents, her abilities, or her intelligence. It has everything to do with identity politics. And, well, her time riding that horse to the finish line is up. And she couldn't get it done.